Hello, and welcome to the Radiant Mission Podcast. My name is Rebecca Toomey, and we are on a mission to encourage and inspire you as you're navigating through this life and with your relationship with Christ. And today we are talking again with our very special guest, Chyna Green. She is a wife, a mom of two, a natural birth advocate, and she's really passionate about informed consent and God's design for birth, which is what we talked about last week. So hopefully you tuned into that episode. If you didn't get a chance, be sure to go back and listen to her testimony about having an unmedicated water birth at a birth center and then an unmedicated and unassisted home birth for her second birth. So it was awesome to hear just how God led you through that whole experience. And one of the things that really stuck out to me when I first got connected with you on Instagram was you had a post that said children belong at birth. And when I read that post, I was like, yes, they do. And we need to talk about this. So first, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me again.
Yes. But we need to talk about this whole children and birth thing. You and I had a very similar experience with that our children were close by, but then not present at the actual birth part of it. And so I want to kind of speak around that because I do think that this is an important conversation to be had because we as a society have built up a lot of walls around the idea of birth and our children being present. And of course, in modern times today, you definitely don't hear a lot about children being present in the birth process. You mentioned last time that you were 4 when your brother was born and you weren't allowed to be in the room with your mom. And that's just a small example. You know, today, I mean, they barely even let a dad and a doula in with a mom at a hospital. So
Right.
we don't really hear stories of moms bringing their kids to the hospital during birth. That's for sure. But in home birth, you know, and in that home birth space, I do see more moms making space and room for their children or involving them in the process. And I just think it's so beautiful for so many reasons. So I really wanted to start by asking you, what was on your heart when you posted that?
Yeah, so it's kind of a funny story, and I don't know if this happens to you a lot just as like a content creator in general, but I was scrolling and became inspired. So,
There you
of
go.
course, um, children being present at birth is something that I wasn't really exposed to until after my first birth. Because, like I had mentioned before, my experience with birth was very like minded. It was very medicalized. And so I think in that space, like you had said, children aren't often present. But after I had my first birth at the birthing center, I kind of saw the realm of women making that space for their children in birth. So once I realized that people were doing that, I was like, there's something really beautiful about this, first off. And goals, right? Like I want that one day. How wonderful. And so, anyways, I was scrolling one night and I came across a Facebook post that, and all it said was children belong at birth. And I was like, they absolutely do, for sure, 100%. And I was like, I need to make something on this. We need to talk about this because up until that point, I really hadn't talked about it much on my Instagram. And I was like, why haven't I talked about this yet? And so I started going through, when I make posts, I try to do research on them and just find information. And I found the small study that was done, and it had compared the thoughts and behaviors of children surrounding birth, right? So a group of children who hadn't been present at birth and a group of children who had been.
Okay.
And it was incredible, their thoughts and views surrounding birth. The children who had been present had a very like realistic idea of where children came from and how children are made. And they also had a general like positive experience surrounding birth. And then the children who didn't had just really outlandish ideas of where children, like talking about like storks and things like that, right? Like just very outlandish ideas about where children, came from, and just in general seemed very confused about birth. And so I was like, wow, this is really, it really does impact our children, and how they view birth, and maybe even how they go on to give birth or support their partner through birth. So yeah, I was just like, this needs to be talked about. More people need to know about this. So that's really what just inspired that whole post in the first place. And it seems like a lot of people are kind of seeing that. And I got so many comments that said, I was present at my mom's home birth, and and I went on to do the same myself, or I went on to become a midwife, or I went on to become a doula because of the experience that I had with my mother's birth. And I'm like, yes, like
That's awesome.
that's why we're here.
Yeah, totally. I definitely started to see the importance of this after going through it myself, right? Because it wasn't really something I had necessarily thought about. I did think when I was having a home birth, obviously, where is my daughter going to be?
Mhm.
Being that she was 2 by this point, 2 and a couple of months old, but still, again, she's not making meals for herself or putting herself down for naps. She still needs someone to care for her. And my mom was going to be in town. She lives out of town, but was coming into town. And I really wanted her to be a part of the experience as much as possible, but I also didn't know what that would look like. So I didn't
Mhm.
overplan it. I basically just said, let's see what happens.
Mhm.
And my mom was really worried because she was afraid that I would scare her because she's like, you're going to scream and
Right.
she's going to be scared. And I just kept thinking, well, I've prepared mentally with hypnobabies, and I don't think that it's going to be like that,
Mhm.
but we'll see how it goes, kind of thing. And when I was in the early stages of my birthing time, she was right there when I first started to have contractions. So my water broke before I had contractions. So I kind of had an indicator. And then when the contractions started, I just put on worship music and I was playing with her, sitting on the floor, like hugging on her. And I just knew like this was the last moments that we were going to have together with just me and her. And before there was another baby. So I was like, come here, let me hold you. And then she was rubbing my back. My mom actually got a bunch of pictures of this moment. And it was just really sweet that we got to have this time.
Mhm.
And as I was progressing, it was actually happened to get close to her nap time. And so my husband, I had him put up the pool right before he put her down for her nap. So she happened to be down for her nap when I had her little brother. The
Wow.
timing of it worked out really weird. She kind of fought that nap though. It was like she knew something was going on.
Mhm.
And she was awake when he was born because we could hear her in her room, but no one wanted to leave the room to go get her because nobody wanted to miss the birth of the baby.
Right.
My husband's not going to leave. He's like in the pool with me. My mom's taking videos. And so right after he was born, my mom went and got her and then brought her into the bathroom. And
Mhm.
she was so cute because she didn't see the birth pool in there before. So she's like, there's a pool in here. She was very like surprised by the pool. And then she's like, oh, baby brother's here,
Mhm.
and I did get that experience in some ways. She just wasn't there for the actual baby coming out part.
Mhm.
And of course, it left me wondering like what that would have been like for her to be a part of that. But obviously, it worked out the way it was supposed to work out.
Yeah.
And so now this time, I'm pregnant right now, and Brooke is going to be 3.5 when the next baby comes, and baby brother's going to be 15 months. So he's going to be really little. He's going to be kind of in her position, but I'm involving her this time as much as possible. So I
Mhm.
actually got this book I got it on Amazon, called The Birth of Our New Baby, Including Children in Pregnancy and Birth by Ashley
Oh, I
Coleman.
love that.
And I don't even know how I came across this. I honestly I don't even know what made me think of it. It was like, it must have been God, because it was just this spark. And then I found this book, and it's an illustrated cartoon type book but not cartoons. They're like drawn like real people, but illustrated. And it's about home birth. It's the story of a home birth. And there are midwives and doulas. And on one page, I laugh because there's a birth photographer like in the background taking pictures, and on her shirt it says birth photographer. And it always makes me laugh when I see it. Anyway, it's really cool because it tells the story of, mom is pregnant and she may feel hungry sometimes or tired sometimes because she's growing a baby. And then it talks about stretch marks and
Oh, wow.
mommy's body is stretching to make room for the baby. And then when it's time for her to go to have the baby, we all have to be very quiet so that mommy can focus
Oh,
on birthing the baby. And it talks about the pool for water birth and birthing the placenta. And honestly, it's a really good book for anybody that's having a home birth, especially that type. I mean, if you don't have a midwife or a doula, then maybe that part won't matter, but it doesn't hurt.
yeah. I love
So
that. That's so neat.
it's just been really cool. And I also, from the beginning of pregnancy, I always said to her that I have a baby in my uterus. I don't say I have a baby in my belly because I wanted her to learn, the truth
Yeah.
about birth. And I think that that's why I really want to have this conversation, is because even though my mom had natural births and she taught me some things about it, you grow up and you don't talk about this stuff all the time. So it's like you grow up, you move on. And then when you have kids, you are programmed however you've been programmed based on your experiences, what you've seen on TV, what you've heard from other people. And I want my daughter to have a good base. I want her to start off on the right foot when it comes to learning about birth. I want her to learn that birth is natural, that the Lord created our bodies to give birth, that we don't need to go to the hospital to give birth. It's not an emergency. It's not a disability. It's this beautiful thing the Lord created. And so I see this as an opportunity to raise up the next generation. And in the same way that women today having babies were programmed within the medicalized system, I think that there's a big opportunity for us to make that change with our kids. And I think that you probably feel the same way and see that too, that we have a chance to help. We're the ones that can influence this change because we're the mothers.
Right. Yes.
We're the moms that are giving birth. And so anyway, this book, funny enough, the first time I read it, she clung to every word. And when I finished reading it, she said, can we read it again? And it's kind of long. And I've read it again. And we finished again. And she goes, can we read it again? She loves it. And so I joke now that she's my little midwife.
That is so sweet.
Yeah, she's my little midwife, and she knows all about birth. And there's a little illustration at the end of the anatomy of like the mom's body from the side. So it'll show the placenta and then the baby in there, the amniotic sac, the cord and everything. And so I'll ask her, what is that? And she's still learning. He sometimes doesn't get all the things right. The cord she has a hard time with. She always thinks it's something else. She's like, it's a snake. I'm like, no, I hope not.
Yeah. Oh, that's so amazing. I love that so much. And I mean, that was something that I talked about in my post too, is at what point did it become taboo to have children present at birth? Like why, they are going to grow up to be adults who have to go through this as well. So why aren't they allowed in this space? And what about this experience is inappropriate for children, right? Because I think that's a really big part of it, is people think, we've created kind of these, the stork brings the baby, and we've created these ideas. Why? Like what about this natural process that God has given us is inappropriate for children? And why don't we want our daughters there to see the transformative experience that they will too hopefully go through one day, right? And how to hold that space and keep that space. And why don't we want our sons to watch their fathers be such an amazing support for their mothers and really learn how, I just,
Great point.
yeah, like at what point did we decide that this isn't okay? It's just so, I mean, just from me talking about in our last episode, how my experiences, even when I was 4, kind of really shaped how I felt about birth initially. I mean, we have the power to change that course and change that path. And like you said, raise up a new generation.
Mhm.
I had, if you don't care if I go into the story about,
Yeah, go into it.
yeah. So we had plans on having my first present for the entire time initially, and we set up kind of childcare, just someone who could watch her for us because she was very young, 16 months when her sister was born, and someone who could care for her, so if dad needed to care for me, he could, and I didn't have to worry about that her needs were being met.
Mhm.
And plans changed, and it was just the 3 of us. And we had my grandma on standby. Like, we'll call you when I go into labor type of thing. And so I'm laboring, and I had already labored for 8.5 hours before I called her. And so anyways, we wake up and we all eat breakfast together. I'm in labor. We wake up, we all eat breakfast together. And I go into the living room, and I told my husband, I said, if you want to take a shower, like now's the time. If you
Yeah.
want to do whatever, now's
Yeah.
the time. And so just my daughter and I are in the living room together, and kind of same thing as you, is we're kind of hugging on each other, and I get the exercise ball out, and she loves it, and so she's on it with me, and I'm kind of bouncing on the ball and doing figure eights and hip rotations and stuff, and she's just sitting there with me. And then it got to the point where my contractions got a little more intense, and so I did hands and knees on the ball, and she's like crawling underneath and trying to crawl on my
She's
back.
like, this is fun.
Yeah, yeah. My husband like has a picture of her like hanging around my neck on my back while I'm on the ball. And it was just, I know, I understand that for some women, they may be like, I don't want that. That's too much distraction. That's
Yeah.
too,
It's
it's too
not
intense.
relaxing for me.
Yeah. And that's okay. And there were a few points where I was like, oh, I wish my husband would hurry up. Right. But the amazing thing is that contractions don't last forever.
Yeah.
And, it's like as soon as it would pass, it was so special to have her there and to be able to hug on her and love on her and just cherish those moments with her as our only baby, because I knew that very soon that would not be the case. So, I got to a point eventually where I was like, okay, let's go ahead and call grandma to come pick her up, because I just really need to focus on my contractions. And like I said, we hadn't had the childcare there. So I called grandma, and she came and picked her up. And not even an hour later, her sister was born. And it's so crazy because looking back, kind of like your situation where she was napping, it was like, I wonder what it would have been like, because it had gone so differently than I thought it would go in my head.
Yeah.
What would it have been like if I just kept her there, if she
Mhm.
just stayed, or if I didn't call grandma and she actually got to see the birth of her daughter, her sister, because for me, a lot of it was she was still nursing, and she was very much a mama's girl. And I knew that it would be a difficult transition for her. And I didn't want her to leave and then come back and say, what's going on? Who's this? Where did this come from? Kind of have that shock that I'm sure a lot of kids do experience. I wanted her present, to know that like this baby came from mom, this baby came from my home. This baby, I just kind of wanted to have that general mindset to make that transition a little bit easier for her. And it didn't happen, and that's okay. But I remember calling my grandma. I didn't call my grandma. My husband called my grandma after her sister was born and was like, well, it's a girl. And, and she's like, yeah, yeah. And she's like, wait, what? He's like, it's a girl. And she's like, we just left. So yeah, it was amazing. And it definitely leaves one to wonder what it would be like, if she had been there
Yeah.
through, that last hour.
Yeah.
And it definitely makes me, want to do the things to prepare more in the future to have her there, because the moments that she was there
Mhm.
were just so special. And, those are things that a lot of moms don't get to experience. And I think that they
Yeah.
should, and that our children deserve to experience that too.
Definitely. There's so much to unpack with this. Thank you for sharing that part of your story. It's so cute.
Yeah.
There's a lot. I think I want to go backwards a little bit to when did this stop being normal? Because obviously 200 years ago, people were not going to the hospital to give birth. They were giving birth at home,
Mhm.
and the children were a part of it and they were around. And so this is my own theory, but with the industrialization of the medical system and our not so good friend, Mr. Rockefeller, and the changes that he made in the medical system, I see that birth in within that network is about, what is the right word? It is about convenience.
Yes.
You know, it is very inconvenient to have a room full of people. It's inconvenient to have a bunch of little kids. And not for nothing, the hospital setting is already not a good place for a woman to progress. So I could imagine a woman showing up with her whole family would be pretty stressful on a hospital network, the hospital
Right.
system. So I can see why they stopped allowing this. I mean, heck, in our grandmother's generation, they were doing twilight sleep. I mean, they were putting these moms out and taking the babies out. And so I can see how it's gotten to where it is now, that within the system, it doesn't make sense for them because it's not convenient. And
Mhm.
I think that that separation has definitely hurt our generation. Now, I will say my brother, he was present for my mom's hospital birth, for the birth of our other brother in the 80s, early 80s. But he was like a teenager then. So they were allowed to have two people, three people, whatever. And he was just one of them.
Mhm.
And he says, I wish I wasn't there. It was really traumatic for me.
Oh.
But it was a hospitalized birth, wasn't a physiological home birth. They gave, this is probably TMI. So sorry, mom, if you're listening and this is too much exposure, but they gave her an episiotomy.
Oh,
And to be a young teenage boy witnessing,
right.
a male doctor going through this whole thing, and then, that whole situation, I mean, it's not good. And so it's for us, I think, for you and I as moms and other moms that are in this community where we're talking about birth and we're encouraging moms to trust the Lord with the design of their birth and to, stay home when you have your babies and that kind of thing. That's kind of more what we're talking about, is thinking of positive ways to involve your children in birth. And even if they're not there for the moment that the baby is born, preparing them in advance is important too. And, something that I learned or heard from a lot of people when they went from 1 to 2 was jealousy. And they
Mhm.
heard, I would hear, oh, yeah, my daughter or son didn't do well with the next baby. And it was a very hard transition. And so one of the things I was really focused on going into number 2 is I wanted to make sure that didn't happen. And I
Mhm.
didn't know if it would work, but it did work. So I'm going to share this tip. I got my daughter a baby doll. I happened to
Yes.
get her a bitty baby, which a lot of people are vetoing American Girl right now. So if you veto American Girl, you can get a different kind of baby. It doesn't have to be that. The point is, that's what she got. And some accessories to go along with this baby. So it was the baby doll, and she had a diaper and a bottle and food and a high chair and all the little things that she could take care of her baby with. And this was when, right around the time she actually stopped nursing, right at 23 months. and I was due 4 months later, something like that. So we actually stopped our breastfeeding journey right before the next baby. And I think that kind of helped in some ways in that scenario, because we were able to take that focus. I mean, she was done by then. She was 2 and she had lost interest. She kind of self-weaned. It was weird. We could talk about that another day, but the baby was a new thing for her. She now has this new responsibility. And so for 4 months, my focus with her was, oh, we got to feed your baby. We got to change your baby's diaper. Let's all the things. It was all about her baby. And when it came time, I would talk to her a lot about the baby that mommy was going to have. And when your brother is born and he comes and he's going to be born out of my body. And I was kind of prepping her verbally with some of this stuff. But what I thought was cool was after he was born, she went like 300% into her baby doll. She was interested in it and we were doing all the things. But then as soon as the baby brother came, she would say, "This is my baby." And she had a little carrier for the baby that was the same as a regular, like an adult carrier. And so when I would have Ben in his carrier, she would want to put her baby daisies, her
Well,
baby.
mommy has a baby, and so I have
Yes.
a baby, and I like
Yes.
that.
And it really helped with that transition. And I also tried the whole language thing too. Some people suggest saying our baby, not my baby. When the new baby comes, to say, this is your baby or this is our baby. And so I tried really hard with that transition, because I was, wanted to make sure that she didn't feel like this is a new baby, you're getting replaced. Like, I stopped nursing you. You're on your own now. you're grown. I'm taking care of this baby. We wanted it to be smooth and seamless. And I have to say, it all worked. So if you're listening and you're looking for ideas going from 1 to 2, start with the baby doll, because it
Yeah.
worked for us.
I love that. That is so neat. I had heard about that too. And we didn't implement the baby doll. We did implement some things, which I'll share, but I just wanted to point out really quick that the fact that when the baby was born, that your daughter had taken so much to the baby doll, right? Because mommy has this, I have this, and it comes back to the children at birth, right? Wow, look at what my mom did. I can do that, right? If my mom can do it, I can do it. And I think that kind of that's a perfect example of how they really look up to us and how they really want to do the things that we do. So
That's a good point. And I want to add one more to that. I mentioned that book before. Whenever I read, a couple of times that I've read that book to her, she'll stop me and she'll be like, that mommy has a baby in her uterus and you have a baby in your uterus. And she goes, and one day when I get bigger and bigger and bigger, I'm going to have a baby in my uterus. And I'm like, oh, that's so precious. And it just reminds me that having these conversations, it's important. And having these conversations is shaping her thoughts about pregnancy and birth and being a mom. And now she does collect a bunch of dollies and say, these are all my babies. I have 3 girls and 2 boys. And she'll tell me. She's going to be like the old lady in the shoe.
Yeah. That is so sweet. We tried the language thing too. And it was, we didn't really do your baby or our baby, but instead of saying, we just said sissy, like, oh, sissy this, sissy that, and of course whatever works for your family. But we also made it, I know this isn't what the general thing was about, but we made it very a point to, like, oh, I'm sorry, we can't do that right now. Sissy needs to eat first. Okay. And then when I needed to do something with the toddler, which this might sound silly, but then I tell my baby, okay, we have to wait because, she's hungry now, or because she wants to go outside. And so instead of only telling the toddler, no, you have to wait, we're going to do this, tell the baby that too, because the baby might not understand, but the older child does. And the older
They're
child
listening to you.
sees that balance and, oh, I'm not the only one waiting, they're also waiting. And so that was just a fun little thing that we did too. Again, just all to make that transition more simple and seamless for them.
That's a really good point, because that is something that they say can impact children when the next child comes, is saying, "Oh, I can't play with you right now because I have to nurse the baby,"
Mhm.
is something that mentally they just can't understand it. And then sometimes they'll actually start to act out
Mhm.
because they know if they're acting up or acting out, then you have to move or shift your attention back.
Yeah.
And so it is important to think about the language that we're using when we do have to do something. I have this tendency to, I'll try to set her up with something if for whatever reason it's just me and her and I need to go put her brother down for a nap. He's pretty quick at this point because he's older now, but set her up with something that she enjoys doing. Like if she
Mhm.
has her paint set or coloring or something, will you color for a little bit? I'll be right back, kind of
Mhm.
thing. And just, trying not to make it a big deal about, I'm leaving you to sit
Yeah.
right here
Yeah.
by yourself because
Mhm.
of whatever reason. But now she is at the age where she wants to do everything with me, and she wants to come in while I'm, nursing him before his nap. But she just can't stop herself from talking.
Yeah.
So she'll come in and she'll be like, she'll whisper, and you can't talk at all. He could still hear you. He's almost a year old. He can hear you. So
Yeah.
it's kind of funny, and it's sweet to watch them grow into that. She wants to take care. She
Yeah.
wants to do those things. And so maybe I should involve baby Daisy. Maybe I just need to get baby Daisy and say, "Hey, you need to nurse baby Daisy quietly."
Yeah. Yeah. There you
And then
go.
I'll put baby Daisy for her nap.
Yeah.
But that's just a beautiful thing. Now, probably got a lot of comments on that post. What were some of the things that you heard about involving children in birth on either side? Moms that
Mhm.
either did involve, or moms that said, "You know what, I could never do this. I don't feel
Yeah.
comfortable with this."
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I'd say the majority was positive, was, like I had said, I went on to have a home birth because my mom had a home birth, or I went on to be a midwife or a doula because
Mhm.
of my experiences. Or, uh, me and my brother. And so, we were all there, and I'm so thankful for that experience. So I got a lot of those, and it was just so, so beautiful to see that side of things, and that there are people even in the generation before us that did invite their children into that space,
Mhm.
and hearing from their children as adults how it impacted their view on birth, and how it inspired them to go on and kind of create that experience for themselves. And then, on the other end of it, I had, there is a mama out here who um, free birthed all 10 of her children. And she was somebody who I had connected with when I was preparing for ours, because I was like, what a wealth of knowledge and
Yeah.
experience she is,
Yeah.
right? And she was one of those who said, nope, I don't want my children here. I need to have my own space. I need to not have disruptions. She just was very on the opposite end of the spectrum.
Mhm.
Like, I don't know why that, I don't know what about that is appealing to you
Well,
type.
I mean, 10 children, that's a pretty full gallery.
Yeah,
You know what
yeah.
I'm saying? Like one child versus even multiple, five. But could you imagine if like all 8 of your children were watching you have the ninth one? That's a lot of people in the room. So I
Yeah,
can
yeah.
understand that.
Yeah, yeah. And then some people who haven't who even had the perspective of that space is not for them. That space is for you and your husband,
Mm-hmm.
who just had a different view on it being more of an intimate type of thing between you and the person who created that baby.
Mm-hmm.
And that was an interesting view too. And I would say there was no like haters per se who were like, you're crazy. This is, overall it was generally very positive. And
That's good.
um yeah, I loved getting the feedback from that and having the conversation surrounding that. And then there were some people who were like, I didn't even think about this,
Mhm.
and I talked about that small study that compared the two groups of children. And
Mhm.
they're like, wow, like I had no idea that it would really impact children into adulthood, because I think a lot of times we're dismissive of what children pay attention to or catch up on or catch on to, or remember, or, like all these little things, they really do impact the tiny humans that we are raising.
Ew. I
So
mean, psychologists say that children are shaped within the first 3 years of their life, that the first three
that's
years are the
incredible.
most critical of all. So imagine, this is not to make anybody feel any sort of way, what I'm about to say, but imagine if that's true, which they're saying that it's true, you're in labor and then you leave and you have, let's say, a 2 or 3 year old, and you go to the hospital and then you're there for a couple of days because you have a C-section, and then you come home. And I think it can kind of explain why some kids do have a hard time with
Mhm,
new baby, because it's like, my mom left me here
mhm.
and came back with this new thing that I don't know
Yes.
what this baby is. And depending on how much conversation there was about the baby coming before, I think that can influence it. But again, like, this is not to say anybody should feel any sort of way about their experience. Please do not. We just want to have the conversation on different scenarios and different options and different things to think about. And even for moms that are like, home birth ain't for me, sis, like, I'm going to the hospital, they can still plan ahead and have certain words that they use or explanations with their children
Mhm.
before they leave. Just have those conversations. But I think it's just to say that this is an opportunity for us to provide a more positive outlook on birth for our kids, is what we really
Yes.
want to get across today. That birth does not have to be this taboo, hidden box of things that nobody hears about until they're in the moment. And then they're like, oh my gosh, what's going on? Another thing in that book, The Birth of Our New Baby, she talks about mommy making loud noises. And that's
Mhm,
another thing. Like, if you're going to have your child present during the actual birthing part, I think that's an important part to train your children on beforehand is,
mhm.
hey, mommy might be hollering or screaming or yelling. It doesn't mean that she's hurt. It just
Mhm,
means that these are the sounds she's making to help the baby come out, is how it's kind of phrased in the book. And then it addresses blood too.
mhm,
When the placenta is born, there's going to be blood, but mommy's not hurt. This is
mhm.
normal. And so it's about normalizing birth, because I mean, do any of us, when a cow is having a calf, or another animal is being born, a dog is having puppies, are we like, no, look away?
Right,
There's
right.
blood. Like, this isn't something that we should see. No, this is normal and natural, and we are mammals, and
Mhm.
we give birth to our offspring. And I think that it's just important for us to prepare our children for that. So,
Yeah,
whatever
absolutely.
that looks like.
Yeah. And it comes back to what we were talking about in the last episode too, about preparedness, is, there is so much that we can prepare for ourselves and
Mm-hmm.
our children. And, outside of the nursery, like, it does not stop there. There are, multiple things that we can do. And it's so funny that you brought up like the cats and the dogs, because I was just thinking last night, we live in a ranching community.
Okay.
And so it's calving season. And so that started February about, and so they're still going. And I was just thinking about how, thousands of cows that are giving birth right now, and they're just on call 24/7, and they don't have expectations for, I know ranchers operate differently, but the ones near us, they don't have expectations. They're just available. And when that mama cow goes into labor and birth and has a calf, that's when it happens.
Mhm.
And it's just incredible the difference that we see um, between them and ourselves,
Yeah.
because we're all giving birth to live mammals, and that process is so trusted,
Mhm.
right? And ours isn't. And
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
very interesting to me.
It is. It is. After having a home birth unassisted, I will say that I think that the cows are doing it right. Like,
Yeah.
I would go have a baby under a tree at this
Yes.
point.
Yeah.
you know, that sounds awesome to me. Everybody thinks I'm crazy now, but I would love to have a baby in the woods, or like, somebody I know, one of their dream is to have a baby in a river. And I watched
Mhm.
this river birth, and I was like, that's kind of cool. or women that want to have their baby in the ocean. I
Yeah.
think that might be a little salty, but
Literally.
I respect it.
Yes.
Because
Where
it's
you're more comfortable, where you're most comfortable,
where your body is calling you to just
Yeah.
be in that space. But yeah, so that is preparedness, important, very important. I like that you mentioned that. And some ways that we can prepare our children is by watching videos of birth with our children. They don't know any different. They
Mhm.
don't know, they aren't taught that this is scary, and they're being taught that this is normal.
Yes.
Imagine how adjusted these little kids are going to grow up to be when it comes to birth. Instead of seeing the Hollywood clips that are 10 seconds long and it's someone screaming and crying,
Mhm.
and it's the opposite. You're watching a video of a mom at home, and maybe she's verbal and she's making noises, but the baby comes out and everybody cries, and the baby cries and everybody's so happy. It's a beautiful scene that I think can be painted for our children. And so that's another
Yes.
thing that's encouraged by this book, is watching birth videos of moms giving birth, but also of animals giving birth too, because it's normal. So
Yeah.
I would say my own personal recommendation would be, I think that the Christian Hypno Babies page, or even the regular Hypno Babies page, they all share very healthy births. You're not going to be finding, maybe sometimes people are a little bit, you obviously have to censor your own content for your children, but
Right. Yeah.
saying that could be a good place for people to go for potential videos that they would want to share with their kids.
Yes. Yeah.
Just an
Well,
idea.
and it,
I don't know if you know of any other ones.
no, I think those are great. The Christian Hypno Babies, they share short clips all the time, and they're usually just absolutely incredible.
Yeah, I'm usually
And
crying.
yeah, same, same. Um, I was talking a lot about mindset and stuff, the last time we had spoken, and with having our children present, right, at birth, and teaching them about birth and preparing them for birth, and will we have that same fear to overcome in future generations, right? Because I think so much of preparing for birth is overcoming the fear and changing your mindset. But if you never have that, that is a giant obstacle that you don't have to worry about. And that's really incredible to think about, because I think that fear stops a lot of women from pursuing the birth that could be beautiful and wonderful.
Absolutely.
Right. So
imagine, not having to reprogram yourself. How great would that be?
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
That's beautiful. Well, is there anything else that you think that moms should keep in mind about children in birth?
Yeah, I think, and this is just me, that we should have a caregiver on standby, right? Especially if you have the young children. If you want your baby to be there from start to finish, having someone who can look after them to help get them snacks or a meal, or change their diaper depending on how old they are, or entertain them, or whatever, help calm them if they get a little nervous, or whatever that may be. Someone who is devoted to your child and making sure that they're okay. I think that's so important, because mom's busy, right? And depending on how you handle labor, you might not be super present. Like my first birth, I was very internal. I didn't talk. I don't even think I had my eyes open. Like I was just in the zone. There's no way I could have cared for a child. And then dad, I want him with me. I want him to support me. I want him to, do all the things that we want our support partners to do, right? So I don't want him having to leave to go care for, our child who maybe needs to go down for a nap, and that's a long process. And so now I'm without support. So anyways, it all comes down to, I think, just having someone on standby to step into that role if needed. If they're just going to hang out on the couch most of the time and the kid doesn't have problems, great. But yeah, I think that having someone there to help is huge. One of the biggest things that I had about having my daughter there, and not having a care person there, was, what if? So the first time I gave birth, I pushed for about 30 minutes, which I know isn't very long comparatively. The second time I gave birth, it was 3 pushes and she was out.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, what kept running through my head is I don't want to sit there and be pushing for X amount of time and my daughter, for whatever reason, have a meltdown or about anything, and my husband be distracted away from me
Yeah.
while
Yeah.
I'm pushing the baby out, so that's my biggest thing is I think children absolutely should be present at birth, but you should be prepared. Again, preparedness. You should be prepared and have a plan, have some of their favorite toys set out, have some snacks and their favorite food ready to go, and just have someone there who can basically hang out with them while you go through this process.
Yes, that's such a great point. There's a name for that, for doulas that take care of kids. What is that title?
Oh, I don't know. That
There,
specific are very specific to.
there's a specific word that they use along with doula for doulas that
Okay.
also will caretake, because some doulas will only assist the mom, but some will basically like watch your kids
Yeah.
instead, like that's their focus if they're hired to do that. Anyway, so there's a name for it.
Yeah.
Probably think of it right after this, but
Of course.
that type of person, so a doula that does caretaking, or of course, if you have a neighbor that you're good friends with that could come over easily, or family member or whatnot. I think you're right though, that having a plan in place, especially if you have little kids, if your child is 6 or 7 years old and you want them to be involved and they're your only child and they don't really need a lot of assistance with things, you might not need this. But if you have young kids, especially 15 months is young, anything could happen. Like you said, like, what if you need to change a diaper? That's the last thing that you want to think about when you're like pushing the baby out, like, oh man, somebody's got to change that baby's diaper.
Yeah.
So great advice. I love it. Anything else you want to leave us with, Chyna?
Gosh, I don't think so. There's so many possibilities and so many conversations that we could stem off from here, right? But no, I think that really, really sums it up.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being here with us today. I appreciate
Thank
you.
you so much.
And if you are looking for Chyna, you can find her on Instagram at chyna.christine, and that's spelled CHYNA.Christine, CHRISTINE, or on her website at msha.ke/Chyna Christine. And we thank you so much for tuning in. I hope that this has been helpful and has got your mind churning a little bit about these ideas of children and birth. If you'd like to follow along outside the podcast, you can join the mission on Instagram or on Facebook at The Radiant Mission, or on YouTube. You can find this in video format there as well. And today we are going to close with 3 John 1 verse 4. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in the truth. We're wishing you a radiant week, and we'll see you next time. Bye.